The 2025 New York City mayoral race was already historic, divided, dramatic, and unpredictable. On the eve of the election, President Donald Trump made an unprecedented move. He directly threatened to withhold federal funds if voters chose the progressive frontrunner. This wasn't just a political jab, it was a national shockwave, transforming a local contest into a referendum on presidential power and democracy itself. Suddenly, the city's future and its financial stability hung in the balance. As news alerts buzzed and anxiety gripped the city, the question became, could a president really punish millions for their vote? The world watched as New Yorkers prepared to cast ballots in an election that now carried national consequences. At the center of the storm were three candidates, each offering a starkly different vision for New York. Zohran Mamdani, a 34-year-old Democratic socialist, energized progressives with promises of radical change and economic justice. Andrew Cuomo, the former governor running as an independent after losing the Democratic primary, campaigned on experience and stability, warning against untested experiments. Curtis Sliwa, the Republican and Guardian Angels founder, ran on public safety and populist outrage, vowing to reclaim the city for working people. Mamdani promised a revolution, Cuomo a steady hand, Sliwa a return to order. Their clash, socialism, centrism, and conservatism, had already polarized the city. Now, with Trump's intervention, the stakes had never been higher. On November 3rd, former President Donald Trump took to his social media platform, Truth Social, to issue a stark warning. In a post that quickly went viral, Trump declared that if Zohran Mamdani were to win the mayoral race, New York City would receive no federal funds, except, as he put it, for the bare minimum required by law. This was not just a political jab, it was a direct threat to the city's financial lifeline, coming at a time when New York was already grappling with budget shortfalls and economic uncertainty. The message sent shockwaves through the city's political landscape, raising fears about what such a move could mean for millions of residents. Billions of dollars in federal aid for essential services, transit, affordable housing, and public health programs were suddenly at risk. The city's sprawling subway system, relied on by millions every day, could face devastating cuts. Housing projects that provide shelter to vulnerable families might see funding dry up. Public health clinics, already stretched thin, could be forced to close their doors or reduce services. The threat wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about the real impact on the daily lives of New Yorkers, from the morning commute to access to healthcare and safe housing. In a high-profile CBS 60 Minutes interview, Trump doubled down on his position. He labeled Mamdani a communist, painting him as a radical threat to American values. Trump argued that it would be wasting money to fund a city led by someone he considered so extreme. His words were not just campaign rhetoric. They were a signal to his supporters and a warning to city officials that federal support could be used as a bargaining chip, or even a weapon, in the nation's political battles. The threat was clear: vote the wrong way, and the city would pay the price. For many New Yorkers, the idea that their access to basic services could hinge on the outcome of an election was both shocking and deeply unsettling. City leaders scrambled to reassure residents, but uncertainty lingered in the air. The possibility of losing critical funding cast a long shadow over neighborhoods already struggling to make ends meet. Federal funds are meant to serve all Americans, regardless of their political beliefs or who they elect to office. These resources are the backbone of cities and towns across the country, supporting everything from infrastructure to education and healthcare. Using them as political weapons undermines the very principles of fairness and equality that the nation was built on. It sets a dangerous precedent, suggesting that entire communities can be punished for exercising their democratic rights. Trump's ultimatum challenged the very foundation of federalism and democracy. The idea that a president could withhold funds to sway an election or punish political opponents runs counter to the Constitution's promise of equal treatment under the law. Legal experts and civil rights advocates quickly raised alarms, warning that such threats could erode trust in government and weaken the checks and balances that protect American democracy. As Election Day approached, New Yorkers faced a choice with consequences far beyond City Hall. The stakes were no longer just about local leadership. They were about the city's future, its values, and its place in the American story. The outcome would send a message to the nation about the power of democracy and whether the people's voice could withstand even the most powerful threats. In a stunning twist that left both parties reeling, Donald Trump threw his support behind Andrew Cuomo, his longtime adversary and a Democrat, over both Zohran Mamdani, the progressive challenger, and the Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa. The move shocked political observers and upended expectations, as Trump and Cuomo had spent years trading barbs and accusations in the public eye. Yet, in this high-stakes race, old rivalries took a back seat to new political calculations. The endorsement was a calculated maneuver, not a gesture of reconciliation or newfound respect. "Whether you like Cuomo or not, you have no choice," Trump declared to his supporters, making it clear that this was about strategy, not sentiment. He framed the decision as a necessary evil, a way to prevent what he saw as a far greater threat to his vision for America. Trump didn't mince words. He urged Republicans to abandon Sliwa, the party's own candidate, warning that a vote for Sliwa would only split the conservative base and hand victory to Mamdani, whom he labeled a radical socialist. The message was clear. Unity was more important than party loyalty, if it meant stopping the leftward shift he so vehemently opposed. Trump's logic was blunt and unapologetic. "If it's between a bad Democrat and a communist, I'll pick the bad Democrat every time," he told the crowd, drawing both cheers and groans. For Trump, the prospect of a Mamdani victory represented an existential threat, one that justified even the most unlikely alliances. This alliance of convenience put Cuomo in an undeniably awkward position. Suddenly, he found himself backed by the very man who had once called for his resignation and publicly feuded with him over everything from pandemic policy to personal integrity. Now, Cuomo had to navigate the optics of accepting help from his nemesis, knowing it could alienate his own base. Republican voters, meanwhile, faced a dilemma. They were being asked to set aside their party loyalty and support a Democrat, one many had spent years opposing. For some, the idea was unthinkable. For others, it was a bitter but necessary pill to swallow. Cuomo, for his part, had to accept Trump's endorsement with a strained smile, aware of the political risks. The move laid bare the extreme polarization of the race and highlighted Trump's willingness to do whatever it took to block a socialist victory, even if it meant supporting a former foe. The political landscape was now more fractured than ever, with alliances shifting and old enmities set aside in the name of expediency. For Trump, defeating Mamdani was worth any political contortion. In this battle, ideology trumped loyalty, and the only thing that mattered was keeping the opposition out of power, no matter the cost. Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic Socialist, became the lightning rod of the race. His platform, tax the wealthy, freeze rents, expand subsidized housing, and make buses free, policies aimed at tackling inequality head-on. Supporters saw common-sense solutions. Opponents saw a dangerous anti-capitalist agenda. Republicans, led by Trump, painted Mamdani as a communist, hoping to scare moderates and conservatives. Even some Democrats were wary, fearing his unapologetic leftism would hurt the party. Yet Mamdani's grassroots coalition, working class, young, and diverse, propelled him past Cuomo in the primary. His campaign was a movement, not just a candidacy, and it drew both inspiration and fierce opposition. When President Trump issued his threat to cut off federal funding to New York City, Zohran Mamdani didn't flinch. Instead, he responded with a bold and unwavering defiance, standing before the press and the public to declare that federal funding is not a privilege to be granted or revoked at the president's whim, but a right protected by law. Mamdani's message was clear. New Yorkers would not be bullied or intimidated by threats from Washington, no matter how dramatic or unprecedented they might be. He called on his supporters to stand firm, emphasizing that the city's future should be decided by its people, not by political gamesmanship from the White House. Seizing the moment, Mamdani pointed to Trump's surprising endorsement of Governor Cuomo as proof that both of his opponents were, in his words, two sides of the same establishment coin. He argued that despite their public disagreements, Trump and Cuomo ultimately represented a political status quo that had failed ordinary New Yorkers for years. By linking his rivals together, Mamdani sought to rally voters who were hungry for real change and tired of politics as usual. Governor Cuomo, meanwhile, tried to turn the tables. He positioned himself as the only leader capable of standing up to both Trump's overreach and what he called Mamdani's radicalism. In a series of dramatic press conferences, Cuomo warned that Trump's threats could escalate, even making the sensational claim that the president might send tanks down Fifth Avenue. His rhetoric was designed to stoke fear and present himself as the last line of defense for New York's values and stability. The city's political class quickly fractured in response. Some Democrats were quick to condemn Trump's threat as a blatant abuse of presidential power, warning that it set a dangerous precedent for federal interference in local affairs. They rallied behind Mamdani's call for resistance, arguing that New York must not bow to intimidation. Yet not everyone in the party agreed. Others, like Representative Tom Suozzi, broke ranks and publicly endorsed Cuomo, arguing that Mamdani's platform was simply too extreme for the city. Suozzi and his allies insisted that only a moderate, experienced leader could protect New York from both Trump's threats and what they saw as the dangers of untested progressive policies. The internal struggle within the Democratic Party was now impossible to ignore. Tensions flared at party meetings and public debates, with lawmakers and activists openly clashing over the best path forward. The city's political landscape was more divided than ever, with old alliances breaking down and new coalitions forming in real time. The mayoral race had transformed into a high-stakes battleground, not just for control of City Hall, but for the very soul of the Democratic Party, and by extension, the future direction of New York City itself. Every debate, every rally, and every headline seemed to raise the stakes even higher. Ordinary New Yorkers watched these developments unfold with a mix of anxiety and determination. Some saw an opportunity to push back against presidential overreach and demand a new kind of leadership. Others worried about the risks of change and wondered if the city could weather another political storm. Conversations in neighborhoods, workplaces, and homes reflected the uncertainty of the moment. As Election Day approached, voters faced a stark choice: to resist the pressure coming from the highest office in the land, or to retreat to the comfort of the familiar, hoping for stability in uncertain times. The decision would shape not only the city's future, but also its identity. With the city's fate hanging in the balance, the stakes had never felt higher. Every New Yorker, regardless of background or belief, now had a role to play in deciding what kind of city and what kind of country they wanted to live in. Trump's threat to defund New York wasn't new. It was part of a pattern. Throughout his presidency, he's used federal funds as leverage, targeting cities and states that defied his agenda. From sanctuary cities to climate policy, Trump repeatedly threatened to cut funding to force compliance. More recently, he's targeted schools and universities over diversity programs and protests. Critics call it an abuse of power. Supporters see it as tough leadership. The tactic turns federalism into a transactional, punitive tool. For New York, the threat was real, and the precedent deeply troubling. Trump's intervention electrified the city, sparking outrage and resolve. New Yorkers, fiercely proud of their independence, saw the threat as an attack on their right to choose. Early voting shattered records, with long lines and a sense of historic urgency. For Mamdani's supporters, Trump's move was a call to arms. For Cuomo's, it was a complicated blessing. Some Republicans felt betrayed, others followed Trump's lead. The city was united only in its intensity. This was no longer just a mayoral race. Turnout soared as voters sought to send a message. New York would not be bullied. The president's gambit had backfired, fueling civic engagement instead of fear. On Election Day, New Yorkers faced a choice with national implications. Would Trump's threats and reluctant Cuomo endorsement tip the scales, or would backlash drive a surge for Mamdani? Some believed Trump's strategy would consolidate the anti-socialist vote. Others saw it uniting the city in defiance. The election became a test: fear of socialism versus fear of presidential overreach. As polls opened, the city held its breath. The outcome would decide not just the next mayor, but the limits of presidential power in local democracy. The future of New York, and a piece of America's political soul, was on the line.